I'm Allie Levine. I'm the New England Regional Assistant Director for Alums for Campus Fairness. A little bit about ACF. We are the only organization harnessing the power of alumni to counter anti-Semitism, including the demonization of Israel on college campuses. We know this work is really, really draining. It can take a really hard toll on you and your mental health. And we want to thank you for all of the hard work you're doing with ACF, with your various organizations and on your own. And we want to make sure that we're taking care of you as much as you're taking care of us. So we have partnered with a few organizations. Last week, we heard from Emily from Bamidbar. This week, we're lucky to be joined by Beth, who is part of BeWell. Beth is the wellness educator at BeWell, and BeWell is the mental health and wellness initiative of the Jewish Federations of North America in partnership with the Network of Jewish Human Service Agencies. She focuses on training and education to help youth and those who care about them increase their understanding of how to best support mental health and wellness in the community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Beth.
So thank you so much. So great to see all of you for this important topic. When we grow up in the Jewish community, we're taught to stand up for things, for ourselves, for other people, and of course anti-Semitism. Especially, I'm sure all of you, like me, have gotten a million emails about Israel today. And every time you turn on NPR, that's all they're talking about. And so, which rolls into the anti-Semitism that we face within college campuses and like within our world, because we are not only do we have to like stand up for ourselves as people, but we also are expected to be knowledgeable. So it's just like an extra added layer of things, and it affects us. Not only I feel like I'm on an information overload today just because of what's going on, but just in general, we're always on high alert. And so it does affect our mental health and our mental wellness. And because we are in this community, everything we do is based on relationships, and the way we experience whatever we choose to do about anti-Semitism, or whatever when we know we need to step back, is all about our relationships with other people, both the people who are showing whatever hatred and with each other, and how much support we have. Sorry, I forgot where my water was. We know that relationships are started through commonalities, whether it's being in the same class for our college friends, or just like being in the same work cohorts. That's how we start relationships, or with our neighbors or whatever, but then they grow because the different connections we have with each other, and that we choose to spend time with people based on those connections and whatever that may look like. But that doesn't mean that all parts of our identities are the same. And actually, we know that some of the best relationships we have are with people who challenge us, who make us think differently, who have different ideas than we do, and see the world from a different perspective. So while the things we have in common can start relationships, we actually learn from these differences, and that we get to explore these differences with each other. And that works because we all have so many different parts of our identity. So we're going to do a quick identity bubble type activity, because I want to know what different identities you all have. So we'll see. My tech has also must have gotten campground. So did that work? Can you see the Mentimeter? Okay. Does anyone need an explanation as to how to use the Mentimeter? Talia, I see your head shaking just because you're like right in my screen. Can you explain it to everybody?
Isn't it like a word bubble where we all put in like words that describe like our identity, and the ones that are bigger are the ones that everyone identifies with?
That's correct. Yeah, the more people that put in the same word, the bigger it will get. So all you do is on your computer, on a web browser, or on your phone, just go to menti.com, and then you use this code that's at the top of the screen, the 53686187, and you should get in. And then you should be able to put a word or a phrase in and just like hit enter. I set it up in theory that so you can respond at least like lots of times, I believe. So we'll see how tech friendly it's being today. Yes, thank you. Menti.com. It's in the chat, but you can't actually put a real link in the chat. So you still have to type the thing in. And will someone let me know if it's not working? And just start whenever. What are some different parts of your identity? We are all here because we are Jewish. Typically, I'd read all these words to you. I'm going to let you do this one on your own tonight. So I see things moving. We'll take just another minute. I'm not shocked that the three biggest ones are Jewish, Zionist, and feminists, because you are all here because you are activists by nature. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but you all can keep entering things in, and I'll send the final one to Allie in case anybody wants it. So that way you can see what all of these are, because this is very cool. We all have so many different parts to ourselves, and they come out in different ways at different times. So how do the different parts of our identity show up in different interactions that you have? Like when you're interacting with a good friend and maybe they say something that is unexpected versus when you're interacting with a stranger that says something that's unexpected. Ooh, I have it on my other screen. I still see things moving. This is very cool. So they show up in different interactions. How do different parts of other people's identities show up in different interactions? What do we learn from people based on our interactions with them? Do people sometimes surprise us? I think that's the biggest thing. I think that every day we learn how much we don't know, and that we don't know what someone else is thinking. And as I teach the teens when I talk about mental health all the time, is we don't know what someone else's experiences are, even if we think that we do, even if we've known them forever. And so sometimes people make offhand remarks that we find offensive, and they truly don't know. Or it was said to them and they heard to them and they heard it somewhere and they don't know what it means. They don't know what they're saying. Sometimes they really truly do mean it, but it's that piece of knowing somebody that helps us identify what we think might be happening. It also allows us to take a step back and ask some questions, which rather than just jump to a moment of like, this is what I need to do about it. So it's always important to remember that just like we have so many different parts of our identity, so does every single person and organization that we interact with. They all have different missions, different goals, and just like us, we all have days that aren't so great and we get snappy. So do other humans. Like that's just part of who we are. And sometimes we say things that we don't mean. Sometimes we say something that we think we mean in the moment, but we don't actually know what it means and we don't know how hurtful it can be. So intention is important. But with that said, impact is just as important. And so we have to decide if we say something, is it truly going to affect the intention and the impact? We have to make a choice in terms of thinking about our own mental health and wellness, what we're going to do in that moment. I'm going to share I'm just going to share the link in the chat actually, because it would be easier than sharing my screen. A text. Oh, maybe Google is not letting me copy and paste the link. Hold on. Now I'm not positive that you're going to be able to get into it based on how difficult that was. Somebody let me know that that worked. Amazing. So this is actually from the Torah portion from a few weeks ago. So this may sound familiar. It's about Zelophehad's daughters, and I am unclear whether I actually pronounced that correctly. And I'm looking at the Hebrew to see if I was close. I was close. Does anyone want to volunteer to read the English for us? Allie, can I pick on you?
Absolutely. I was
Thank
about
you.
to, one more second. All right. I'm also going to butcher this name. I apologize in advance. The daughters of what?
Oh, I was gonna say it looks based on the Hebrew, it's Zelophehad.
Zelophehad. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
The daughters of Zelophehad of Manassite family, son of Hefer, son of Gilad, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, son of Joseph, came forward. The names of the daughters were Milcah, Noah, Hogla, Milcah, Tirza. They stood before Moses. I apologize. My dog clearly also wants to participate in this read along. And Tirza. They stood before Moses, Eleazar, the priest, the chieftains, and the whole assembly at the entrance of the tent of assembly, of the tent of meeting, and they said, "Our father died in the wilderness. He was not one of the factions, Korah's faction, which banded together, against God, but died for his own sin and had left no sons. Let not our father's name be lost to his clan, just because he had no son. Give us a holding among our father's kinsmen." Moses brought their cases before God, and God said to Moses, "The plea of Zelophehad's daughter is just. You should give them a hereditary holding among their father's kinsmen. Transfer their father's share to them. Justice, justice, you shall." Oh, sorry, that is the next one. I'm skipping ahead.
You did great. So props to Allie, because I gave her a Torah portion that had way more names in it than typically has in any parsha, and they are not easy. So great job. Thank you very much. Talia, I like your little clapping. Perfect. So okay, a few questions, quick summary. Who are five main folks in the story? Women or men? Yeah, women. So which in itself is a big deal in the Torah, especially because they actually went through each of their names, which is unusual for an old writing. The Torah is, ancient. And it's fairly patriarchal, as we all know. So like it's actually that in itself is a big deal that they name these women. Where did they have this meeting? I don't remember. It's right at the entrance to the Mishkan,
In
which
a
is
tent.
yeah, but it's like the tent. Women aren't typically allowed to gather there. Like that's actually a pretty historic thing that they brought themselves to that tent. I'm sure they weren't invited, but they did it. They made it happen. Basically what happened is their father died and none of them were married. And so they weren't entitled to inherit the land because it goes to the men instead of the women. And they were like, well, that's not right. Just because we're not married, like he was our father. We should get the land too. And so they met at the entrance to the Mishkan and made their case to Moses and all of these important people. The high priest was there, the tribal leadership was there, the entire Israelite community. And not only did it change what was happening for them, because they made their case successfully, I wish it actually told us more about how they did it. So I'm sure it's somewhere in stories. Just not like written in the Torah. But I think that would be a very interesting discussion with, especially with a group of teenage girls. But how so not only did they change it for them, but they actually got the law of the land changed. So the new law was that women could also inherit land from their fathers. So they actually like took an action. They stood up for themselves, and they were able to make real change happen, not just for them, but that trickled down to the rest of the community. So, what we do matters. One, like they actually took a chance. They made real change. They had no idea what was going to happen. And we know that, in these stories, they're not always so nice to the daughters. So like literally anything could have happened at this point. But it worked. And two, they had to know that it was okay to take this chance. So they must have grown up in this household where Zelophehad himself actually like created this environment with messaging, symbolism, role modeling, etc., that empowered his daughters to stand up for themselves, to say like that isn't right. That they had the confidence and they had the skills to speak up, not only for themselves, but to change the law for everyone that came after them. So that's what you all are doing when you're working with your chapters, is you're actually providing the confidence for people to have these conversations. So, which is amazing. Like you actually get to be there and help people know that like when they're feeling that gut feeling of like, oh, this could be difficult, they have the skills and they have the knowledge and they have you to know that someone is behind them saying it's okay, like you can do this, that I may not physically be with you, but like you're allowed to try to make a change, and to try to make that all happen. So these women are great examples of incredible communal leaders. They made their needs known even when it wasn't typically done, and they really made something happen. So what do you all do in order to create that environment for people to show their activism? How do you support those? How do you support your folks that you work with?
So I work for an organization called the Israel on Campus Coalition, where we like work specifically like in student government. Thank you. Supporting students and like fighting anti-Semitism on a student government level, which is becoming increasingly difficult. And it takes a really big toll on our students because they feel like the entire student body is basically against them for their identity. And that is really draining for students, and it feels like they're fighting an uphill battle. So for me, I always let them know that, first of all, there's a whole team of people behind them who is there to support them, and you can lean on us so they don't feel so alone. Something else that I do, thankfully, COVID is not over, but we're traveling again. So I am able to travel to these campuses and be hands-on with the students. So that way they feel like not only like, in theory that I'm supporting them, but I'm physically there supporting them. And that really goes a long way. And I think that for these students, they really just need somebody to talk to and verbalize how they're feeling, because it's a processing thing. Like they don't know how to process how they're feeling. And for me, like someone who was a student and has been in their shoes, and I'm now in this field for about 6 years. I've been able to use my own experiences as a student, as a professional, to let them know like, hey, you're not alone in this. Like this is not the first time something like this has happened. And it's not going to be the last, but on this campus, it can be. And them hearing that, I think goes a long way. So yeah, that's what I try to do. I just try to be kind of like a voice of reason, and be someone that they can, process with.
That's incredible, Talia. Thank you so much for sharing. So your students are really lucky to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
So much.
great support. Can anyone else tell us how they support your folks to stand up and be activists? And it doesn't have to be big activists. Sometimes we need to support our folks just to have a difficult conversation with somebody. which is less talked about. Sometimes it's actually even harder for people because you don't have a group behind you. Like we can all say we're going to go to a march because you can go with your friends. And so you can just physically show up, and that's like part of being an activist, which is very important. I don't want to negate that. And sometimes you're having a conversation or you hear something, and many of us in the moment don't know how to respond right away. Many of us just don't think fast enough to respond. Like I actually have to walk away and take myself out of a situation before I can truly come up with a response. And that's okay. So how do we teach our folks how to either go back to have that conversation or to just even be ready for a next time? Because the reality is there's going to be a next time in the world today. And I have no idea what any of you do professionally, so this could be like totally out of the ballpark for y'all. How did someone do it for you?
Talia was actually the person that did it for me. Because like we talked about it in the last one, but I was like very involved with Stand With Us when she used to work for Stand With Us. And when there was like issues going on in my university, she was kind of like that person for me. And then now I'm my occupation grad student, but I'm like studying art therapy. And so I was thinking about like, I feel like thinking about what she did for me and what I do for my clients, because it's like very different, but kind of like focus on like what you can do and not what you can't do. Because then you'll feel like a greater like sense of like autonomy and accomplishment, and it won't feel like as much of an uphill battle and like burn out as quickly. And I feel like that kind of I got it from both sides. Like I was getting it and now I'm kind of giving it. Yeah.
What a wonderful way to bring this full circle for us. Thanks, Alana. Anyone else? What's your gut instinct when you hear something that you're like, oh, that doesn't sit well with me? That sounds hateful. How many of you all immediately say something? How many of you all, yeah, I feel like Talia and Ali, you all have the professional experience to be able to immediately say something. How many of you all need a few minutes to even process what happened? I'm in that camp. Like I don't even always realize. Sometimes my brain is so trained to like focus on the other things that's what's going on in the conversation that I don't even like think about it. And then a few hours later, I'm like, wait a minute. I think that maybe someone made an assumption about something. And so which that's just human. Like we all work both ways. And sometimes we're just looking for it. I imagine Talia in your job, that's what you do is you're looking for it. But Alana, I'm with you, the anxiety and then the anger. Because if I realize it, then all of a sudden I also like get anxious and I'm not sure how to appropriately handle that. Which leads us to talking about boundaries. What is a boundary? What does that word mean? Who can control our boundaries? Is it someone else or is it us? Yeah, we're the only ones who can control our boundaries. We set boundaries about what we think about different situations, but we can actually control how somebody handles themselves in those situations. We can only control how we react to those situations. We can train people to hopefully, respect our boundaries more. But like it's on us, which is to figure out how to react and to figure out what we're going to do in different situations. And so we all know that there's overt anti-Semitism that we see, and we all know that there's some of that undercover covert anti-Semitism that we see, and we get to decide how we're going to react to that in the moment based on our boundaries. And our boundaries are not always the same. They can change from one day to the next. I know that all of a sudden feeling camp crud, that my boundaries are very different than when I'm feeling healthy and like my typical self, because my capacity is just different than when I'm, running around and feeling great. So how do you decide your boundaries? What do you know? And how do you help your students set boundaries? Talia, go for it. Sorry.
Yeah. For me, like setting boundaries is knowing like when my cup is full and when my cup is empty. I can't help my students if my cup is empty. And I think that being honest with students and being like, hey, like I'm just as stressed out about this as you are, like being honest with them and telling them where you're at and be like, and hopefully they can understand that like I'm A, sympathizing with them, and B, I want them to know that like I feel the same way that they do. And I think that it makes it easier for them to understand, because they're like, oh, like when I'm feeling like this, like I can only give so much. But luckily, like, for me, it's like I can turn off my phone and not have to deal with it after a certain time. My hours of operation are 9 to 5, typically. Obviously it looks different day to day. But like if I really need to disconnect, I can. And I think that what's hard for students is that they can't. It's their roommate, it's their professor, it's someone in a different organization that they're also a part of, and it's not like they can just easily turn it off. And so boundaries are important for us, so that way they so we can support them through those times, if that makes sense.
I also think that you're such a good role model for them. Like it's okay that you turn it off sometimes. And it's also great that, they know that things affect you too, that we're all human, that we don't grow out of the emotional reaction to hatred and anti-Semitism. But we feel it too. We just have more practice responding to it in different ways. So thank you. That's super important.
Of course.
How else do the rest of y'all set boundaries or teach other people to set boundaries? How do you feel when a boundary is pushed?
I think it can be really hard when a boundary is pushed, especially if it's somebody that like I know well and I care about. And I feel like they're taking advantage of me. When it's somebody I don't know, it's easier to chalk it up to like ignorance. They didn't know that was something that was going to be pushing my boundary. They didn't know that. But when it's somebody that's like in my circle, in my life, like Ilana said in the chat, like it can make me feel very unsafe. It can make me feel very uneasy.
I agree with all of that. And that's another one of those situations when we don't know what to do necessarily. And again, that's we don't always know that it's a boundary that's being pushed. We don't always have the words to be able to say that. I work with kids all of the time, and the first thing that they feel when they get anxious is their stomach starts to hurt. And I imagine that most of us feel that way. We just also have the language to say something, to say what's going on. But sometimes our boundaries are being pushed, and that's our first reaction because we don't actually have the language. Our society is not great at teaching us to say like, no, I don't have the capacity for that, or I can't do that right now, or this doesn't feel right for me. We're taught to push through. And in some situations, super important, especially when we're supporting our young people with facing anti-Semitism and hatred. And just like Talia said, it's also important to be able to shut down and take care of ourselves and take that moment. So that way we can help push when we know that we need to, and we can help support them. So boundaries are really difficult. And they're especially interesting because our boundaries are always changing. And one thing that we teach our college students is that your boundaries right now are not always going to be your boundaries. and that we have to learn to communicate them in a respectful and way that is safe for all of us, which is different in every situation. I always use the example, actually, Talia, you said something about your cell phone and that you can just turn it off. And college kids have theirs, or they're willing to answer everything at all times of the day. So like, unless you're calling them and actually physically want to talk to them, but if you're texting them, they'll respond usually. So it's like, that's just such a different boundary. They don't think it's strange to get a text at 2 a.m, but like, I was the nifty Missouri Valley Regional Director for almost 10 years, and my regional board knew that like if it was an emergency, they could call or text whenever, but we had to figure out what an emergency was. Like, we always had to talk about that. An emergency is not, did you remember to buy Fruit Loops for next week? That's an email if it's past 8 p.m. or whatever. We always had times, and we span time zones, which it seems like with your job you also span time zones. So like, that's a fun boundary to set. We just can't expect everyone to remember it all the time, but they do learn, I promise. You just have to be really nice about it. So we get to decide what works for us and how we're going to communicate it. We are less nice when it's about hate and anti-Semitism than when it's about texting at 10 o'clock at night to ask about Fruit Loops. But we have to decide ultimately. And setting the boundaries for the things that matter less, it teaches us how to set the boundaries for the things that really matter. So it's good practice and it's good role modeling. So that way it's not just you spring into action when something is life or death or something, is scary, but like, we also get to show that we have boundaries around sleep and food asks and personal time and all sorts of different things. So that way, you get to tell the people that you're working with that, look, I set boundaries around these things and they may seem inconsequential at the moment, but like, we also set boundaries around the really big things, the really important things. And this is how we can work, how to do it all together and how we can practice those things. So anything else about that? Bad boundaries? They're hard. So keep practicing, really. I think as adults, they're hard. Especially when we start, like, as Jewish communal professionals, we really care. Not that other professionals don't care about the people they work with, but like, we live and work in the same community. It just feels really connected. And it's just really hard to say no. And I got to watch that. I've been at 5 camps in 4 weeks, and you get to watch it. And as an outsider, you want to just go into like senior leadership and be like, just take a break. It's okay. If like the tennis balls don't get to the right spot, or like if whatever, everyone's going to be okay. Like, let somebody else do it. But when you're in it, it's not so easy. And we all can acknowledge that. And so I just encourage you that, like, after you're in a situation, whether it be about, getting the cookies to the right spot, or, dealing with anti-Semitism, that you do step back and think about how you handled it and what you might do next time, because so many of our reactions are truly muscle memory. And so the more we practice them, the easier it gets. Not that it's ever easy. So, but Judaism tells us to keep practicing. So I'm going to go back to that document. And Allie, you were ahead, but like, you were right on. You knew exactly where we were. Will you read the Tzedek quote for us?
All right. Justice, justice shall you pursue, that you may thrive and occupy the land that your God is giving you.
Thank you so much. I imagine this sounds familiar to some people. I always think of, honestly, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is like one of the first things that comes to mind when I read this quote, because of all the work that she continued to do, no matter what was standing in her way. And so really, it's just a reminder that Judaism tells us that pursuing justice is an ongoing process, that it's not something that's ever ending. I mean, it would be lovely. And that there's always work to be done, and that we get to take a part in doing that work together. And that involves so many different things. It involves, the big actions. It involves the going to student government and making policy changes. And it also involves the conversations with roommates and with professors, to talk about, why did they schedule an exam on a Jewish holiday? I imagine that happens still, which is baffling to me. But like, it's still a thing that we have to talk about. And we get to decide what our capacity is at any moment. And that's still pursuing justice, even if we decide that we're at capacity for that moment, for that situation. Sometimes it's just setting the next person up, which is a lot of what you all do in this organization, is you're setting up the folks that you work with to continue to pursue the justice, whatever that may look like, wherever they need. It also means taking time to take care of yourself, which is exactly what your next session is going to be all about with Blue Dove Foundation and the wonderful Carly Coons. So that is what I have for you all. I'm going to send Allie the document, though. I encourage you to use any of these texts and readings with your students, with the folks that you work with. It's a great resource for you all just to talk about why this is important. And I will also send Allie, I'll save the PDF of our word cloud because it's really cool. Any questions? Allie, what else can I send you or answer before we leave?
I think this was excellent. And we just really want to thank you for being here and leading this conversation and, maybe pushing your boundaries a bit while not feeling well and still showing up. We really appreciate that. I know how hard that can be. I know that's really tough to power through. And we've also been planning this for a while. So thank you for being here. Thank you everyone else who's here, who showed up and participated. We love having you here. This is so helpful and meaningful.